Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. It's great to see such a packed room. I'm Dearden from Community Trade Union, and we're a union representing workers all across the economy, from the finance sector, logistics, the justice and custodial, education, to manufacturing, steel and many more. I think it's fair to say the past couple of years have been quite challenging for those in the manufacturing sector, from the challenges of the business climate to impacts of government policy. And from what we've seen at Community and experiencing, that unfortunately that does ring true. Okay, thanks. Companies reorganising, struggling, and recently with our steel industry, we're in a very difficult time to say the least, and we'll hear more about that over the next hour. However, this year we have also seen some pockets of better news, with Make UK's annual analysis showing that the UK has climbed from 9th to 8th place in the global rankings for manufacturing, due to a significant jump in output to £224 billion. And as we look to a general election, Labour needs a bold and credible economic strategy fit for the current landscape and for the future. So today we're going to be discussing how much manufacturing should play its part in Labour's wider economic growth, stability and resilience agenda. And to do so, we've got a great panel of speakers for you, with a range of perspectives, and some of the questions I'm keen for us to explore today is how can Labour best support Britain's domestic manufacturing industry and ensure manufacturing jobs are located in the UK, for Labour to achieve clean power by 2030 and a just transition, and what role manufacturing should play in sort of restructuring the economy, and finally and crucially, is manufacturing Labour's future. So I hope we can have a really thought-provoking and insightful discussion, no matter what the answer to that final question might be. So now to introduce our panel. So to my right we have Alan Coombs, Community NEC member and elected chairman of the Multi-Union Committee in Port Talbot Steelworks. We have Torsten Bell, Chief Executive of the Resolution Foundation. Stephen Kinnock, the Minister for Immigration, MP for Aberavon, and Chair of the Steel ABPG in Parliament.
Shadow Minister, but let's not delve on the details.
I'm clearly getting carried away. We have to work really hard to make sure he is. To my left, Graham Lanktree, the journalist covering trade for Politico, and Anna Valero, Senior Policy Fellow at the LSE's Centre for Economic Performance. And thank you all so much for joining us and being with us here today. So I'm going to kick off, and firstly I'm going to ask Stephen if he could kick us off with his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, and many thanks to SME for Labour, who I know do so much really important work around the whole manufacturing agenda. But I really do want to thank Community Union. It's great to see my very good friend Roy Rickus in the audience there. I was at an event the other day, and I said I think I've been talking to Roy more these days than I do to my wife. So it's great to see you here, Roy, and I feel that Community Union is the union that really is the voice for our steel workers. It's such a progressive, modern union that deals with the world as it is, but is very clear about where our red lines are, and we continue to work very, very closely with Community, both at the steelworks in Port Talbot and nationally. So it's a real honour to be invited by Community and SME for Labour to make a few opening remarks on this today. I think the broad question is around, does the United Kingdom want and need to have a steel industry or not? And the answer to both of those questions, want and need, is an unequivocal yes. The reasons being our national security. We live in an increasingly dangerous and turbulent world, not just in terms of the risk of the rise of authoritarian states such as China and Russia that we clearly can't rely on to be constructive and friendly partners of the United Kingdom, where we have so many of our supply chains coming through those countries, but also look at things like the pandemic. Let's not forget that Trostra, the steel plant near Llanelli, takes its steel from Port Talbot and rolls packaging steel there, such as tin cans, which are a vitally important part of our food supply chain. And when you've got massive challenges like a pandemic, do we really want to be seeing those food supply chains and other crucial parts of our critical national infrastructure where we're having to rely on other countries for that? The second piece is around good jobs that you can raise a family on, that you can raise a community on. The steelworks in my Aberavon constituency is the largest in the country. We are so proud of the steelworks in terms of the role that it's played in building Britain, but it's also played such a crucial role in building the communities and families, not just in my Aberavon constituency, but right across South Wales and across the United Kingdom. The average steelworker's job is significantly paying significantly more in terms of salary than the average wage across the South Wales region, for example, and that's the same wherever you look, whichever steel town you look at. So it's about national security, it's about jobs, and then of course it's about the transition to net zero. There is no future transition to net zero without a strong and viable steel industry. You can't do the transition in terms of building those wind turbines, for example. What do we think they're going to be built from? Huge opportunity near my Aberavon constituency in the Celtic Sea to construct floating offshore wind. Those substructures and those turbines have to be built with steel. They need to be built by British steel, because that is the only way in which we're going to deliver on national security, deliver on the good jobs that we need, and deliver in terms of supporting the transition to net zero. So it is a no-brainer, but we've been so badly let down by the last 13 years of Conservative government. They have created an energy policy that is absolutely hammering us in terms of what we pay for our energy compared to the likes of France and Germany. We pay 50% more per kilowatt hour for our energy in the UK in terms of manufacturing and energy intensive industries than they do in Germany. They've had no procurement strategy, so we're in a situation now where British Royal Navy frigates are being built with Swedish steel. It is absolutely crazy. I know this man is. I've got nothing at all.
Let's not start shitting on Swedish steel.
I've got nothing at all against the Swedes, but the Swedish steel should be for Sweden, and we need British steel.
It's very small.
And you've now totally made me lost my track. This is so the government's let us down, failed to have that industrial strategy that we need. We need a Labour government. We need Labour's Clean Steel Fund. I'm going to use an example and bring to a close here, which is focusing in on what a lot of you will have seen in the news recently about the deal that's been done between Tata Steel and the UK government. Of course, investment in our steel industry is very welcome, but the mistake they've made is put all their eggs in the electric arc furnace basket. Electric arc furnaces are a vitally important part of the transition, but we have to be able to make virgin steel in this country, because if you don't, you start to lose your customer base, you lose your order book, and you go into this cycle of managed decline, which is frankly what our manufacturing sector has been for too long now. So we need to have, we should have had a far more bold, ambitious and imaginative approach for that deal, which was based on direct reduced iron and investigating options like carbon capture and storage, but we've got no hydrogen plan in this country, so that I think was inhibited the deal in terms of the direct reduced iron opportunity. But with Labour's Clean Steel Fund, what we need to do is see one big change, which is proper consultation with the trade unions. Utterly disgraceful that those announcements were made without proper consultation with community union and other steel unions. Labour would never operate an industrial strategy on that basis, and then we need a proper conversation about what is the long-term vision for our steel industry, using that mixture of electric arc furnace, DRI, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, so that we can continue to make primary steel and continue to give our country a steel industry that it can be proud of, and that we as a country then can stand more firmly on our own 2 feet in an increasingly turbulent and dangerous world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and I would now like to hand over to Torsten, whether he will talk about Swedish steel or not. Off we go.
Swedish steel is not my specialist subject. I'll leave that to the disgraceful racists next to me. Anti-Swedish attitudes are spreading through Britain like wildfire. There's no getting rid of this. First they come for the Swedes, and then anyway, right. So look, everyone in this room is going to agree that Britain's industrial tradition is something that we are very proud of. That's why we are reliving the feel of a furnace in here right now, so that we can all get that raw feeling of being in I'm sorry about the sweat. Everywhere. Now, what is Britain today? Britain today is a service-led economy, but with some really important parts of it in the manufacturing sector. Some really important sectors. Everyone talks about steel rightly, because that's the one where there's an existential crisis right now. There's a semi-existential crisis in the car industry, which is also a long-term British strength. There's other strengths that we never ever talk about, like booze. When people say manufacturing, they tend to mean the things with steel or metal in them. Booze is actually one of our biggest specialisms as an exporting country, and is a manufacturing industry. I was up in Chester the other day, just down the road from here, and there's a great bottling plant there. Obviously you can't import and export loads of bottles because they tend to break, but they're moving their furnaces over to hydrogen. They've already signed a contract, which is the first person who has talked to me about hydrogen that wasn't a PR guy for the industry, but had actually done something, the guy running this bottling plant. So there's lots of things we should be proud of. It's not just about sectors, it's also about places. Because one thing that is really important about the role that manufacturing plays in the British economy, as I say, it's not the biggest part anymore, it's 10% of our economy, about 8% of jobs, but in some places it is the only viable route to a high productivity activity taking place there. The steel industry is certainly true. Port Talbot is not replacing its steel mills if it loses them. I mean, there's not some other, accountancy is not opening up in Port Talbot and providing those jobs. It is that. But it isn't just there. The same thing will be true if you go to Derby. Why does Sunderland have high productivity? Nissan. Right. Why is Cheshire rich? Chemicals. Right. So there's places where manufacturing, even though it isn't the case for the country as a whole, is the only viable route to high productivity activity, and it's really important that we hold on to those things. The other thing everybody wants to talk about, partly because people love America and partly because we're a bunch of social democrats, so we like to save the planet, is the future of green manufacturing. There's two different chunks here. There's we'd like to have our steel, not the dirty Swedish steel, being used for the wind turbines and the rest. But there's also just making sure that the bits of our industry that are heavy carbon users are able to survive that transition. Just to be a bit optimistic on that front, you'd rather be us than Germany, right? The amount of our economy that is very, very carbon intensive is much smaller than a very manufacturing heavy economy like it. So the cost of supporting the bits of it that we want to support, steel is the one being mentioned today, is much lower. So a bit of optimism on that front. But on the green stuff, I would just encourage us, it is important, it is not going to be transformational to the economy as a whole. And that's really important to understand, because some social democrat parties around the world are putting all their eggs in the manufacturing for a green economy basket. That will not deliver enough volume of good jobs, nor enough productivity to make this country rich. It's really important, but you cannot put all your eggs in that basket. I'll just then encourage you to focus on the quality of our manufacturing as much as on the quantity, which again is unfashionable because it's nice to celebrate everything we've got today. Everything's brilliant. There's no bad manufacturing company in the entire country, but we do need to talk about that, partly because we need to stop worrying about it shrinking so much, because deindustrialization is basically done. Right? That's the story of the last 100 years, 120 years. Actually, in terms of the fall in the economy and the fall in employment, we've probably bottomed out. Maybe not as we've bottomed out lower than some people would like, but the big changes have happened. Right? That's what everyone lived through in the 1980s, 1970s, 1990s, into 2000s. But the speed of the decline is gone. Right? That's why you're not seeing huge factory closures in the same way that you saw in another. So that's the first reason not to worry about the quantity as much. The second is that reindustrialisation on a massive scale isn't going to happen. That's partly because we don't have enough Germans to do it, but it's also because if you look at patterns of global trade, service trade is growing much faster now than goods trade. Much faster. In fact, actually, another bit of good news, because it's nice to have some good news about Britain these days when we haven't had any wage growth for 15 years, but the things that Britain's actually good at on the service side, trade there is actually growing faster even than service trade generally. Like, if Britain wasn't a basket case, we could be minting it right now, just to give you a bit of optimism. That's what we technically say in our reports. Then lastly, if you're worried about the quality, not just the quantity of manufacturing, you've got to think about Brexit. And this is because this isn't like, generally Brexit is generally quite bad for manufacturing right now. Lots of you will have probably seen that in your daily lives. If you look at which trade has come down after Brexit, it is goods trade that has fallen almost entirely. In fact, I can't even really see it in the service trade numbers particularly. Don't shout at me, Ramonas, but I can't see it really in the service trade. I can definitely see it in the goods trade industry, cars, chemicals, the lot. So it's not just though about the short-term trade hit. The thing that matters for the quality of our manufacturing is that the structural effect of Brexit is not to shrink our manufacturing or actually to grow it, despite what some people said. Any Lexiteers in the room? Loads of people told me before the referendum this was the answer to growing our manufacturing. It's just bullshit. Along with many other things that were said. But what it does do is change the nature of the manufacturing. It pulls us out of European supply chains for things that you need to do in large markets where economies of scale exists. Cars and chemicals are really good examples. These are the productive bits of the manufacturing sector. But it does grow other bits of the manufacturing sector. Food manufacturing. It grows the less productive bits that serve a smaller domestic market. We import less food, more food manufacturing happens in the UK. I don't think that's what people thought they meant when they said they wanted more manufacturing. Has anyone been in a food manufacturing plant recently? Right. Some of them are great, a lot of them are terrible. Are those jobs good? I'm not sure they're the best jobs in our country. So I think, to be really honest, that what we should be focusing on is the quality of our manufacturing. We need to be more highly productive, right? Not just rowing about whether there's more or less of it. I'll wrap up there.
Thanks very much, Torsten. And now I'd like to hand off to Graham.
Okay, so I cover trade for Politico, and I've covered the kind of like post-Brexit trade agenda. Been doing a lot about the UK-India trade talks recently. Oh, sorry. Here, I'll bring this closer. So like I was saying, I cover a lot about the post-Brexit trade agenda, and I've done quite a bit of work on the UK-India trade talks. People often talk to me about export-led growth, and a lot of businesses that I talk to say that when domestic consumers don't have a lot of money to spend, they're looking to other markets for their growth. And so right now, according to government figures, exports last year were about 834 billion. And of those, goods exports and services exports were kind of on the same level, actually. Goods exports were 423 billion, and the services were 411 billion, out of a 2.5 trillion GDP economy. So it's quite a large, exports are quite a large part of the British economy. And there's a problem with that, though. The WTO has said that goods trade is actually falling at the moment, and their forecasts for the rest of this year aren't as high as they were earlier in the year. And we don't know if this is going to be a trend that continues, because China, the war in Ukraine, global geopolitical factors are weighing on trade. And so the UK has to kind of like come up with an industrial strategy. That's been one of the topics that's been on everybody's lips here at the Labour Party conference. And this is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very, very difficult thing for the government to do. The current Conservative government has had a hell of a time trying to figure it out. And Labour is really going to have to put a lot of thought into which sectors it wants to support. Because right now the government has put like it's put nearly £1 billion into Tata Group alone. And the Trade Secretary has said we don't pick winners. And they've picked a winner in this. But they haven't spread that money around. So are you going to just invest in a single company? They're saying they're coming up with an advanced manufacturing plan, which should be in the autumn statement. And they say that they're going to pull forward about hundreds of millions of pounds to support the electric vehicle industry. And meanwhile, the United States government is spending billions to support this sector, this industry. And the next government is going to need to find some policy levers that it can pull to be able to support this, potentially what is some people consider a kind of bedrock of the British economy, because vehicle trade is it's always in like the top 5 goods that Britain exports. So there's a question of whether there's enough money to actually put into this sector, and if you can't give subsidies, what kind of policy levers do you have to pull? And I guess I'll just wrap up there because seems reasonable.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. And now over to Alan. Yeah, I think if you just maybe... Do we have a stand-in? Another mic? Is that all right for you?
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Cheers. I worked in the steel industry. I know you're all laughing at me, but then work is probably a strong word. I've been in the steel industry for 40 plus years in Port Talbot, and for 23 years of that as a union rep. So you'd expect me to support manufacturing, and you'd expect me to support the steel industry, and rightly so. But I think there's more to it than just what you produce. I think Stephen touched on quite a lot of the same things that I'm going to mention. Quality jobs, how that feeds back into the communities, how that feeds into everyday life, and in Port Talbot particularly. You know, there is a pride in manufacturing, there's a pride in what people do, and it's an identity. And once you come away from that, you lose your identity and you lose your pride. I don't want to get into naming names of the places that have our steelwork shut down and that, and what happens there. But the quality jobs don't return. It's as simple as that. And I think we need that. We need the quality jobs, and we need the pride to move forward. To be honest with you, I think what's happened at the moment within Port Talbot, it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors in my view. It's nothing to do with the green agenda. What you see at the moment in Port Talbot is basically bringing in Indian, sorry, I'm not going to mention Sweden, bringing in coal from elsewhere in the world, and getting rid of our order book and leaving somebody else to it. Where does that make any sense, and where can that be part of a green agenda? It's not the green agenda, it's just getting rid of jobs and it's moving them elsewhere. Now, we've got a great opportunity, I believe, within steel and going forward with the Labour Party to grab control of this and be the lead for the change. What we've done for too long, in my view, is watch the rest of the world move forward in certain industries, and we've been left behind in a lot of manufacturing areas. Now, wouldn't it be great and refreshing if we could grab hold of this and try to lead the way with it? And I think we've got a major opportunity with it at the moment. So I just want us to grab that opportunity along with the Labour Party and deliver it and put some pride back into our communities and into our industry and manufacturing.
Thank you, Alan. And now over to Anna.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. So I'm just going to take a broader look at the need for growth in the UK and what that means for our industrial strategy and what that means for manufacturing. So we urgently need a growth strategy. We know that because we've had this particularly poor productivity growth for a very long time. And we know that what underlies productivity growth is innovation and its diffusion. We also know that manufacturing is a sector where there's a lot of scope for innovation. A lot of it happens, whether it's new technologies, new processes, and more can happen as well. So when we're trying to think about what should be our industrial strategy, we need to have a really solid understanding of what we're good at, but also what we need to be good at. And we've heard some of that for security reasons today. So as Torsten said, we're a very large services exporter, and we're particularly specialised in that as well. And it's not just finance, it's business services, it's creative sectors, architecture, lots of things that really are kind of good jobs and create positive externalities across the economy as well. Crucially, lots of these areas are large and growing across the world, so that means that it's got growth potential for us if we can tap into those export markets even more. However, manufacturing does account for a tenth of GDA, and as I said, that's where a lot of our innovation, our strengths are also, particularly in advanced manufacturing space. So we're specialised in pharmaceuticals and the life sciences. We see clusters around the country, not just in the kind of Oxford, Cambridge, London Golden Triangle, but outside of that. For example, the Sheffield's Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, which is recognised globally as a place of excellence in manufacturing. So if we take a more forward-looking view and we look at patenting or other measures of innovation, we can see that the UK is really specialised in lots of really important areas as we look to the net zero transition. So we're specialised actually in offshore wind invention, in CCUS, in tidal stream energy. We're actually exporting competitively a number of green products, kind of classified in the trade data, and our capabilities are quite close to other products, which suggests we could move into them. So So I guess I'm a bit more optimistic about the net zero transition, a global transition, which will increase demand across the world for net zero products and services. We're a centre of green finance as well, consultancy, regulation, design. But why should we, if we're a top innovator, not be able to access more of that through tech startups, through manufacturing startups that actually can scale up and create jobs here in the UK? As Torsten said, we don't often hear good news about the UK economy, but last week I was in Oxford where the World Intellectual Property Organisation was launching this Global Innovation Index. The UK comes out fourth in that. So, these indices, they combine lots of different metrics, but the reality is on all the innovation outcomes things, we do really well. When it comes to actually diffusing the technology through the economy, commercialising, that's where we do a bit worse. So we need an industrial strategy. We need an industrial strategy to address this productivity challenge, but also to build on these many real strengths we have here in the UK. And also given the challenges that we face, the geopolitical change, the lack of security in some places, or the need to build our resource efficiency as well in light of the energy crisis. There are many policies for that are what we would call horizontal. They're kind of economy-wide. They're not targeted at specific sectors or technologies. But if we do a lot of those things, we can be pretty confident that investment in long-term innovation, which by its nature has to be sustainable. The world is committed to net zero. We're committed to net zero. Things like getting more pension funds into productive assets in the UK, corporate governance reforms to get management to take a kind of longer-term view on value creation, permanent tax incentives for capital investment, reform to make the system more stable, more understandable for businesses, planning reform such that our innovative clusters can grow and people can live in the productive places. And of course, support for the high growth SMEs, which we know can access seed capital here in the UK pretty well, but there seem to be issues when it comes to scale up. There are other barriers as well that face the SMEs across the economy, things like lack of skills, lack of the information of which technologies to apply to their business processes, and those things can be addressed by policy. But, in general, we're going to think also about targeting. As was mentioned before, there are targeted industrial policies in place by the government, often specific funds or specific sectors. But what we really need is a much more coordinated, transparent, understandable approach of when that support is going to be provided, so it doesn't end up something that appears to be a bit behind closed doors. And we can see the areas that we have strengths, and there are many data sources or pieces of analysis or discussions with stakeholders that can determine that. We can also understand where we need to be good for security reasons. But of course, we can also justify this through kind of economic concepts such as externalities. So where are there particularly high spillovers from innovation to other agents in the economy? We've actually shown in our analysis that with green technologies, the spillovers to other innovators are particularly high. So that's kind of added reason to be thinking that supporting these technologies would be good for the UK. Plus, when you look at the specialisation in green technologies, it's quite spread around the country. So we argue that if you support these types of activities, you're not just going to strengthen the already productive places and leave other parts of the country behind. So I think we can learn from the Inflation Reduction Act. It's much bigger in scale, we're in fiscally constrained times, but we do have regulatory levers at our disposal which we shouldn't be diluting or playing around with. What we really need is certainty for businesses to allow them to invest. And we've also argued before in some of the work we've been doing, also with Resolution Foundation, that we could strengthen the institutions governing growth policy and industrial policy. And it's nice to see that Labour has talked about bringing back the Industrial Strategy Council, something even broader than that, really focused on productivity and growth, so that it's got the horizontal aspects, the vertical aspects, with really rigorous kind of analysis, policy recommendations, and crucially reporting to Parliament, would be a positive step to actually create or facilitate the political process to take difficult decisions for longer term outcomes where the payoffs take some time to be felt. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and it's been really, really interesting to hear your contributions and such a brilliant range of perspectives from direct experience as well, so thank you to all our panellists. And now we are going to open up to the floor for questions, so please raise your hand if you have a question. We'll probably do 2 rounds looking at the room. So I will take the lady there, the lady at the back, and you at the front, and then we'll do another round for the following questions. If you could please say your name and where you're from before you question, that would be great. Thank you.
My name's Helen Goodman and I'm from Bishop constituency. Everybody in this room knows manufacturing is important. Everybody's in favour of it, and there are aspects of it that we are very good at. And one of the reasons we're very good at it is because we've got very strong R&D in our universities. But we also need to look at the skills base. Now, everyone always talks about people, the more junior people in manufacturing, but I want to say we need to have a strategy for management, because British management is not that great. And in my constituency, what I noticed was that quite a few factories were being run by foreigners. So they were getting much higher calibre people to come, maybe from Austria, maybe from Sweden, maybe from Ireland. And we really need to have a strategy on this. Now, when the London Business School was set up, it was intended to be a business school to improve British management. They are tremendously proud of themselves because they have loads of overseas students and they say, what a great export we are. Actually, that is a failure because we're not growing new good managers. And we need to be less snobby about manufacturing and get more good people into it.